October 17th, 1943. Stalag Luft 3, deep in occupied Poland. The interrogation room is cold, sterile, and terrifying. Flight Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Harrison sits across from Hauptmann Heinrich Eberhardt, one of the Luftwaffe's most skilled interrogators. Harrison has been here for 3 hours. He's given nothing but name, rank, and service number, exactly as the Geneva Convention requires. But Eberhardt isn't frustrated. He's smiling. He pushes a manila folder across the table. Inside are photographs of Harrison's wife and children back in Yorkshire, details about his training base, the names of his squadron mates, even the serial number of the Lancaster bomber he was flying when shot down 2 weeks ago. Eberhardt speaks perfect English with a slight Oxford accent. "You see, Flight Lieutenant, we already know everything. We know about your missions, your targets, your losses. We even know about the little pub near your airfield where you celebrated your 25th birthday last month. So why not simply confirm what we already have? It costs you nothing. And in return, I can make your stay here much more comfortable." Harrison's hands are shaking, not from fear of torture. The Luftwaffe treats captured airmen relatively well compared to other German forces. No, he's shaking because he realizes something terrifying. The Germans know things they shouldn't know. Things that can only come from prisoners who talked. And in that moment, Harrison makes a decision that will save his life and dozens of others. He will become an expert, not in talking, but in the art of strategic silence. Welcome to Cipher Tales, where we uncover the hidden stories that changed the course of World War II. Today, we reveal the extraordinary true story of how one captured Allied airman survived years in German captivity by mastering the dangerous game of interrogation resistance and teaching others to do the same. The story begins not with Harrison's capture, but with a crisis in Allied prisoner survival rates that military intelligence desperately tried to hide. By mid-1943, Allied bomber losses over Europe are catastrophic. The United States 8th Air Force alone is losing 25% of its crews on some missions. Royal Air Force Bomber Command suffers similar casualties. Thousands of young men are parachuting into enemy territory every month, and most are captured within hours. They arrive at German interrogation centers exhausted, traumatized, often injured, and facing expert interrogators who have refined psychological manipulation into a dark art. The problem isn't physical torture. The Luftwaffe generally respects the Geneva Convention when dealing with captured airmen. The problem is much more sophisticated. German interrogators use a combination of psychological pressure, false friendship, careful deception, and exploitation of fear and isolation to extract information. And it works terrifyingly well. British and American intelligence officers analyzing debriefing reports from repatriated or escaped POWs discover a disturbing pattern. Approximately 70% of captured airmen reveal at least some operationally useful information during their first 72 hours in German hands. Not secrets about bombing targets or classified technology. Most aircrew don't have access to that level of information anyway. But small details, squadron numbers, base locations, aircraft performance problems, bombing accuracy issues, crew morale, losses on recent missions. Individually, these details seem harmless. Collectively, they provide German intelligence with an incredibly accurate picture of Allied bomber operations. Wing Commander Ian Wilson at British Military Intelligence realizes they have a massive security problem. The standard instruction given to aircrew is simple. If captured, give only name, rank, and service number. Refuse all other questions. But this instruction is hopelessly inadequate against trained interrogators who don't ask direct questions, who instead engage in seemingly friendly conversations that gradually extract information without the prisoner even realizing they're revealing anything useful. Wilson needs someone with first-hand experience, someone who has faced German interrogation and survived it without breaking, someone who can teach others how to resist. That someone is Jimmy Harrison. Harrison's capture happens on a night raid over Hamburg on September 30th, 1943. His Lancaster bomber is hit by flak over the target. The aircraft's port wing is on fire, the hydraulics are gone, and 2 engines are dead. Harrison orders the crew to bail out. 6 men successfully parachute into the darkness. 1, the rear gunner, goes down with the plane. Harrison lands in a farmer's field 20 kilometers south of Hamburg. He hides his parachute, checks his escape compass, and starts walking west toward the North Sea, hoping to evade capture and somehow reach neutral Sweden. He makes it exactly 11 hours before German police find him sleeping in a barn. The next 48 hours are a blur of trucks, trains, and temporary holding cells. Harrison is processed through several facilities before arriving at Ausvertestestelle West, the Luftwaffe's main interrogation center near Frankfurt. This facility is purpose-built for extracting information from captured Allied airmen. The Germans call it Durchgangslager der Luftwaffe, but Allied prisoners know it by its abbreviated designation, Dulag Luft. Harrison's first shock is the temperature. His cell is freezing cold, probably around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a wooden bench, a single thin blanket, and nothing else. No window, just a small ventilation grate near the ceiling. The door is solid steel with a peephole. Every 30 minutes, a guard looks through the peephole, checking on him. Harrison can't sleep properly, because every time he starts to drift off, the door opens and a guard shines a flashlight in his face, then leaves. This continues all night. It's deliberate sensory harassment designed to break down his resistance before interrogation even begins. On the second day, Harrison is brought to the interrogation room where he meets Hauptmann Eberhardt. The contrast is stark and intentional. The cell is freezing cold, but the interrogation room is warm and comfortable. There's hot coffee on the table, real coffee, not the ersatz substitute most Germans are drinking by 1943. There's also a pack of American cigarettes, fresh bread, and butter. Eberhardt is charming, educated, and sympathetic. He apologizes for Harrison's uncomfortable accommodation and explains it's just temporary bureaucratic processing. Once the paperwork is complete, Harrison will be transferred to a proper POW camp where conditions are much better. Eberhardt makes no immediate attempt to extract military information. Instead, he makes small talk. Where is Harrison from? Does he have family? What did he do before the war? Eberhardt mentions he visited England before the war, studied at Oxford for a year, loved the pubs in the countryside. He speaks fondly of English literature, cricket, and the British sense of fair play. He's building rapport, establishing himself as a reasonable person rather than an enemy. This is textbook interrogation technique. Establish trust before attempting to extract information. Harrison gives only his name, rank, and service number, exactly as trained. Eberhardt nods sympathetically. Of course, that's your duty. I respect that. Then he opens the manila folder and shows Harrison the photographs and documents. This is the moment designed to break the prisoner's will, the revelation that resistance is pointless because the Germans already know everything. But Harrison notices something crucial. The information in the folder is dated. The photograph of his wife was taken 18 months ago. He recognizes the dress she wore to a wedding. The details about his training base are accurate, but they refer to facilities and personnel from early 1942, over a year ago.
The squadron information is partially correct but contains several errors. Eberhardt's intelligence is real but outdated, which means it came from earlier prisoners who talked, and the Germans are trying to make it seem more current and comprehensive than it actually is. Harrison makes a calculated decision. He admits to nothing, confirms nothing, but he also doesn't appear completely uncooperative. When Eberhardt asks general questions about life on an RAF base, Harrison gives vague, harmless answers that contain no operational value. The food was adequate. We played cards in the evenings. The weather in Yorkshire is usually terrible. These answers maintain the appearance of conversation without revealing anything useful. Eberhardt tries various approaches: sympathy, implied threats about transfer to harsher facilities, offers a better treatment, suggestions that his crewmates are cooperating in other cells. Harrison maintains the same pattern, friendly, but revealing nothing of value.
After 5 days of interrogation sessions, Eberhardt gives up. Harrison is processed and transferred to Stalag Luft 3, the main POW camp for Allied Air Force officers. During the journey, Harrison notices something interesting. He's transported with a dozen other newly captured airmen. Most of them are talking freely among themselves, comparing stories about their interrogations. Several mention they confirmed squadron details or discussed recent operations because the Germans already knew anyway. Harrison stays quiet and listens. He realizes most of these men have inadvertently given the Germans exactly what they wanted: confirmation and updating of existing intelligence. Stalag Luft 3 is a massive facility holding thousands of Allied airmen. It's the camp that will later become famous for the Great Escape in March 1944, but when Harrison arrives in October 1943, that mass breakout is still months away. The camp is divided into compounds: North Compound for RAF officers, South Compound for USAAF officers, and so on. Harrison is assigned to North Compound, where he meets the senior British officer, Group Captain Herbert Massey. Within a week of arrival, Harrison is summoned to Massey's barracks for a debriefing. This is standard procedure. The senior officer interviews every new arrival to gather intelligence about conditions outside the camp, German military movements, and most importantly, interrogation techniques at Stalag Luft. Harrison provides a detailed account of his interrogation experience, including his observation that many prisoners inadvertently cooperate by confirming information the Germans already possess. Massey listens intently. He's been worried about this exact problem. British intelligence has recently sent secret messages through the Red Cross warning that German interrogators are becoming more effective. Massey needs someone to organize a systematic training program to teach newly captured airmen how to resist interrogation. Harrison seems perfect for the role. Harrison is initially reluctant. He's not a trained intelligence officer or psychologist. He's a bomber pilot who happened to notice a few things during his own interrogation. But Massey is persuasive. He explains that aircrew arriving at Stalag Luft 3 often don't realize they've revealed valuable information until it's too late. They need education before capture, but that's impossible. The next best option is education immediately after arrival at the camp, before they're repatriated, or before information they possess becomes obsolete. Harrison agrees and begins developing what becomes known informally as the Silent School, a systematic program to teach POWs about interrogation resistance. But there's a massive challenge. He can only teach men who are already in the camp, which means they've already been through interrogation. The program is therefore defensive, teaching them what they did wrong so they can spread the word if they escape or are repatriated, and ensuring they don't make additional mistakes if they're interrogated again. Harrison's approach is revolutionary for its time. Rather than simply telling men to say nothing, he teaches them how German interrogators think and operate. He breaks down the techniques into categories: rapport building, the "we already know" gambit, false identification as Red Cross or neutral officials, planted stool pigeons in cells, exploitation of fear and discomfort, and the "everyone else is cooperating" pressure. The sessions take place in various barracks, disguised as educational lectures about other topics to avoid alerting German guards. Harrison uses real examples from his own experience and stories from other prisoners. He emphasizes that German interrogators are not stupid. They're highly trained professionals who understand psychology and manipulation. The key to resistance isn't stubborn silence, which can actually make interrogators more aggressive. The key is controlled conversation, appearing cooperative while revealing nothing of value.
Harrison develops specific techniques. First, the vague truth method, answering questions with information so general it's useless. What type of aircraft did you fly? A bomber. What base were you stationed at? In England. Where in England? The East. This maintains conversation without providing specifics. Second, the outdated confirmation technique. If an interrogator shows you information and asks for confirmation, always treat it as if it's outdated. Is this still accurate? I don't know what's current. That might have been true a year ago. This prevents you from updating German intelligence even if they pressure you to confirm existing data.
Third, the compartmentalized knowledge defense emphasize how little you actually know. Most aircrew genuinely don't have access to classified strategic information. Harrison teaches them to stress their limited knowledge even for things they do know. I flew missions, but I didn't plan them. I don't know why we bombed certain targets, I just followed orders. This is largely true and difficult for interrogators to challenge. Fourth, the physical hardship excuse. Use your genuine exhaustion, injuries, and trauma as explanation for memory problems. I was shot down 3 days ago. My aircraft was on fire. I'm not thinking clearly. I can barely remember what happened. This buys time and provides plausible deniability for refusing to answer questions. Fifth, and most importantly, the recognition of manipulation skill. Teaching prisoners to recognize when they're being manipulated. The friendly interrogator who offers coffee and sympathy is manipulating you. The aggressive interrogator who threatens harsh treatment is manipulating you. The interrogator who claims everyone else is cooperating is lying. Once you recognize the manipulation, you can resist it. Harrison's teaching evolves through late 1943 and into 1944. He interviews dozens of newly arrived prisoners about their interrogation experiences, constantly updating his understanding of German techniques. He discovers that Gulag Luft interrogators maintain detailed files on Allied squadrons, bases, and even individual aircrew. They compile this information from multiple sources: prisoner interrogations, captured documents, aerial reconnaissance, signals intelligence, and even analysis of bomber formations and tactics observed during raids. One particularly valuable insight comes from a captured navigator named Peter Thompson, who arrives at Stalag Luft 3 in January 1944. Thompson reports that his interrogator showed him a wall chart tracking recent bomber losses, dates, locations, aircraft types, and squadron markings. The chart was disturbingly accurate, containing information about missions flown just days before Thompson's own capture. The interrogator used this chart to convince Thompson that resistance was pointless. "We track every bomber that falls from the sky. We know your losses better than your own command does." This is largely true and difficult for interrogators to challenge. Harrison realizes the Germans are using prisoners' own knowledge against them in a sophisticated feedback loop. They extract small pieces of information from many prisoners, compile it into comprehensive intelligence, then use that compiled intelligence to intimidate future prisoners into cooperating. It's brilliant and deeply effective. Breaking this cycle requires prisoners to understand they're not just protecting their own knowledge, they're protecting future prisoners by denying the Germans the ability to build these comprehensive intelligence pictures. By spring 1944, Harrison's reputation spreads beyond North Compound. American officers in the South Compound request his assistance in teaching USAAF airmen similar techniques. The Americans are suffering particularly high losses. Some bomber groups lose 70 to 80% of their crews over the course of their tour. The survivors who end up as POWs are often very young men, 19 or 20 years old, traumatized and vulnerable to manipulation. Harrison begins conducting joint sessions, teaching both RAF and USAAF prisoners together. The instruction takes on additional urgency after the failed mass escape in March 1944. The Germans execute 50 recaptured officers, including several men Harrison knew personally. The camp's atmosphere becomes much more hostile. Security increases. The relatively lenient treatment Allied airmen received under Luftwaffe control begins to erode as the SS takes more direct control of POW matters. Harrison realizes as Germany becomes more desperate, interrogation techniques may become more severe. His teaching adapts accordingly, preparing men for potential harsher treatment. One of Harrison's most valuable contributions is his analysis of what information actually matters. He works with senior intelligence officers in the camp to categorize information into levels of sensitivity. Category 1 includes anything that could directly affect operational security, future bombing targets, new equipment or tactics, specific aircraft performance data, code words or procedures. Category 2 includes information that could provide strategic intelligence, general morale, bombing accuracy assessments, crew training quality, maintenance problems with aircraft types. Category 3 includes information that seems harmless but can be compiled into useful intelligence, squadron numbers, base locations, command structure, personnel movements. Category 4 includes genuinely harmless information like personal background, pre-war occupation, family details that aren't sensitive. Harrison teaches prisoners that Category 1 information must never be revealed under any circumstances. Category 2 should be protected, but can be discussed in vague terms if under severe pressure. Category 3 is where most prisoners make mistakes. They reveal this information thinking it's harmless, not realizing it feeds German intelligence compilation. Category 4 can be discussed, but should still be limited because interrogators use it to build rapport and trust.
The effectiveness of Harrison's program is difficult to measure directly, but several indicators suggest it makes a real difference. Senior officers notice that prisoners who arrive at Stalag Luft 3 in late 1944 seem more aware of interrogation techniques than those who arrived in 1943. German interrogators apparently complained to camp authorities that newer prisoners are less cooperative than earlier arrivals. And most tellingly, several prisoners who were temporarily transferred to other facilities for additional interrogation and then returned to Stalag Luft 3 report that German interrogators have changed tactics. They're using more aggressive techniques, suggesting their previous psychological approaches are becoming less effective. Harrison's personal story takes an interesting turn in January 1945. As Soviet forces advance into Poland, the Germans evacuate Stalag Luft 3. Approximately 10,000 POWs are forced to march west in brutal winter conditions. This becomes known as the Long March or the Black March. Harrison marches with his compound through snow and ice, covering nearly 90 kilometers in a week with minimal food and shelter. Dozens of prisoners die from exhaustion, exposure, and disease. Harrison survives, barely, and ends up at Stalag 7A near Moosburg in Bavaria. At Moosburg, Harrison discovers a troubling new development. The camp is overcrowded, chaotic, and holding prisoners from all branches of service, not just airmen. The Germans are conducting additional interrogations, apparently trying to gather intelligence about Allied military plans as the end of the war approaches. Some interrogators are now Gestapo or SS rather than Luftwaffe, a very bad sign. Harrison quietly organizes small discussion groups among airmen in his section, teaching them enhanced resistance techniques for dealing with more aggressive interrogators. He emphasizes that with the war clearly ending, the most important thing is survival. Don't antagonize interrogators unnecessarily, but also don't reveal anything that could endanger Allied forces still fighting. Liberation comes on April 29, 1945, when American forces overrun Moosburg. Harrison has been a prisoner for 19 months. He's lost 40 pounds, suffers from chronic respiratory problems from the march, and has recurring nightmares. but he's alive. And the knowledge he developed and shared has potentially saved many lives by preventing German intelligence from being as effective as it could have been. After repatriation to England, Harrison undergoes extensive debriefing by British intelligence officers. They're intensely interested in his observations about German interrogation techniques and his training program at Stalag Luft 3. Harrison provides detailed reports that become foundational documents for post-war Syria training, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. The techniques he developed through observation and experience form the basis of formal resistance to interrogation training that continues in various forms today. Harrison is awarded the Military Cross for his leadership in the POW camp, though the citation is vague about specifics. The true nature of his work remains classified for many years. He returns to civilian life, working as a civil aviation inspector, and rarely speaks publicly about his POW experience. In private conversations with family and close friends, he emphasizes that his survival wasn't about heroic resistance, it was about understanding the psychology of interrogation and making calculated decisions about what to reveal and what to protect. The broader strategic impact of interrogation resistance is significant but difficult to quantify. We know from captured German intelligence documents that Luftwaffe interrogators at Stalag Luft compiled extremely detailed information about Allied bomber operations. They knew squadron organizations, base locations, aircraft performance problems, typical mission profiles, and bombing accuracy issues. Much of this came from small pieces of information extracted from many prisoners. If Harrison's training program reduced the flow of this information even by 20 or 30%, it potentially saved Allied lives by making German defenses slightly less effective. The psychological dimension is equally important. Knowing how to resist interrogation gave captured airmen a sense of control in a situation where they otherwise had none. It reduced the psychological trauma of capture by providing a framework for understanding and resisting manipulation. Many repatriated POWs reported that understanding interrogation techniques helped them maintain their mental health and sense of dignity during captivity. The German perspective is illuminating. After the war, several former Stalag Luft interrogators were interviewed by Allied intelligence officers. They reported that interrogation became progressively more difficult as the war went on. Early in the war, many prisoners cooperated extensively, not realizing they were revealing useful information. By 1944, prisoners were noticeably more aware and resistant. Hauptmann Eberhard himself, when interviewed in 1946, attributed this change to education within the POW camps. Prisoners were clearly teaching each other how to resist our methods.
Harrison's story represents a different kind of World War II heroism, not the dramatic action of aerial combat or ground assault, but the quiet persistence of maintaining resistance while physically helpless. His contribution wasn't killing enemy soldiers or destroying enemy equipment. It was denying the enemy information, which is a more subtle but equally vital form of warfare. The techniques Harrison developed have lasting influence. Modern military resistance to interrogation training incorporates many of his insights. Understand interrogation psychology. Recognize manipulation. Appear cooperative while revealing nothing useful. Use physical and mental stress as explanation for limited cooperation. And maintain solidarity with fellow prisoners. These principles remain valid because human psychology hasn't changed. Interrogators still use rapport building, deception, isolation, and fear to extract information. And resistance still requires understanding these techniques and consciously defending against them. Harrison's silent school also illustrates an important principle about security. It's not just about individual resistance, but about collective defense. When one prisoner talks, they potentially compromise many others by providing information that interrogators can use against future prisoners. When prisoners understand they're protecting each other, not just themselves, their motivation to resist increases. This collective security mindset becomes a crucial element of POW survival and resistance throughout the remainder of World War II and in subsequent conflicts.
The story of Jimmy Harrison and his resistance training program remained largely unknown for decades after the war. Official histories of Stalag Luft III focused on the dramatic escape attempts, particularly the Great Escape of March 1944. The quieter, but perhaps equally important work of teaching interrogation resistance received little attention. This is typical of intelligence and counterintelligence work. The successes are invisible because nothing happens, while failures are spectacular and obvious. Harrison himself never sought public recognition. When interviewed by historians in the 1970s, he downplayed his role, insisting he simply shared observations with fellow prisoners. But the documentary evidence, including debriefing reports, German intelligence assessments, and testimonies from other POWs, tells a different story. Harrison developed and implemented a systematic training program that measurably improved Allied airmen's ability to resist interrogation. This saved lives, protected operational security, and demonstrated that even in captivity, soldiers can continue to fight effectively through denial of information.
The human cost of interrogation and captivity shouldn't be minimized. Harrison and thousands like him endured years of imprisonment, inadequate food, harsh conditions, and constant psychological pressure. Many didn't survive. Those who did often carried psychological scars for the rest of their lives. Harrison's own post-war struggles with anxiety and nightmares were typical of POW survivors. The techniques he taught helped men survive and resist, but survival itself came at tremendous personal cost. Yet Harrison's story is ultimately one of resilience and adaptation. Faced with an impossible situation, captivity in enemy hands with expert interrogators trying to extract information, he observed, learned, and developed countermeasures. He then shared this knowledge systematically, potentially helping hundreds of other prisoners resist more effectively. This represents the best of human ingenuity and solidarity under pressure. The legacy of resistance to interrogation training continues today. Every military branch trains personnel in SERE techniques before they deploy to high-risk environments. These programs explicitly teach the psychological principles Harrison discovered through observation and experience. Understand interrogation as psychological manipulation. Maintain emotional control. Recognize common tactics and resist without appearing completely uncooperative. The specific techniques have evolved with changing interrogation methods, but the fundamental insights remain valid. Harrison's approach also influenced broader intelligence practices. His categorization of information by sensitivity level became standard in military intelligence training. His emphasis on collective security, understanding that individual compromises can cascade into broader intelligence losses, shaped post-war operational security procedures. And his practical, experience-based teaching methods demonstrated that effective resistance training doesn't require complex theoretical frameworks. It requires clear understanding of what interrogators do and practical techniques for countering those approaches. Flight Lieutenant James Harrison returned to a quiet life after the war, but his contribution to Allied victory was significant and lasting. He transformed interrogation resistance from a simple instruction, "say nothing," to a sophisticated practice based on psychological understanding and practical techniques. He taught hundreds of prisoners how to protect themselves and others, and he demonstrated that even in the darkest circumstances, when physical resistance is impossible, mental and psychological resistance can continue effectively. The story of the POW who survived by trading secrets of silence is ultimately about the power of knowledge and training to maintain human dignity and military effectiveness even in captivity.
Harrison understood that silence isn't just absence of speech. It's a strategic choice about what to reveal and what to protect. He mastered this art and taught it to others, creating a legacy that extends beyond his own survival to influence how military personnel prepare for and resist enemy interrogation to this day.
But here's the secret nobody tells you about Jimmy Harrison's resistance training. He wasn't the only one running secret education programs in POW camps. At Stalag Luft I in northern Germany, an American intelligence officer named Captain David Westheimer organized an even more sophisticated program that included mock interrogations where senior officers role-played as German interrogators to test younger prisoners' resistance. The Germans discovered this program in early 1945 and shut it down, but not before hundreds of American airmen had been trained. The techniques developed at Stalag Luft I were classified until 1997 and formed the basis of Cold War SEER training. And there's something even stranger. British intelligence secretly communicated with Harrison and other POW camp educators through coded messages hidden in Red Cross parcels and letters from fictitious relatives. These messages provided Harrison with updates about current German interrogation techniques based on recently captured prisoners' debriefing reports, allowing him to keep his training current. The sophistication of this covert communication system wasn't revealed until files were declassified in 2003, and some messages remain classified even today. And there's an even more shocking twist. Several German interrogators at Stalag Luft were actually anti-Nazi officers who deliberately made interrogations less effective as a form of quiet resistance. One interrogator, Hauptmann Horst Kopkow, reportedly warned certain prisoners about particularly dangerous questions and helped them understand what information the Germans actually needed versus what they already knew. After the war, Kopkow was quietly recruited by British intelligence and helped design NATO interrogation resistance training. His identity remained classified until his death in 1996, and full details of his activities during the war are still partially redacted. Want to know what those secret Red Cross messages said? Curious about the mock interrogation program at Stalag Luft I that was so effective the Germans shut it down? Subscribe to Cipher Tales because our next video reveals the secret intelligence networks that operated inside POW camps, the coded communications, hidden radios, and covert operations that turned prisoner camps into active resistance cells behind enemy lines. The reason why some camps became more dangerous to Germany from the inside than Allied bombs from outside will shock you. If this story amazed you, smash that like button. It helps us uncover more hidden stories of survival and resistance. Drop a comment below. Could you resist a skilled interrogator trying to extract information? What would you do differently than Harrison? Would you volunteer to teach other prisoners even if it put you at greater risk? What other POW survival stories should we cover? Share this video with anyone interested in psychological warfare and resistance. They need to know how ordinary men developed extraordinary techniques for mental survival. Until next time, remember, the strongest weapon isn't always the one you carry in your hand, but sometimes the one you carry in your mind, the knowledge of when to speak and when to remain silent. This is Cipher Tales, where courage takes many forms, where silence becomes strategy, and where the human spirit finds ways to resist even when the body is imprisoned.